Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? A surprise afternoon live. I'm here in the conference room at the new office that I'm working out of. Very, very exciting stuff. And since I am alone in the conference room, I have asked permission and I am going to actually take off my mask, right? I'm alone here in the conference room, very far away from everyone else, shut off, glass walls separating me from the rest of the office. So I've taken my mask off, but gotta be careful, gotta be careful. How are folks doing today? Glad you could be with us here for a surprise afternoon live. This is exciting stuff, I think. Very exciting stuff. Just getting the camera right. I didn't bring my tripod. But I'm glad you all are here. If you haven't done so already, tweet this out, make this a bigger conversation. Let's see how many people we can get to join us here. It's now just after 4 o'clock here in New York City, 4 p.m. And let's see who we can get to join us this afternoon for a little afternoon conversation. I am excited. So, share this on your Reddit, share this on your Facebook, share this on your Twitter. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you have not already done so. Let's have a nice little conversation this afternoon. Folks, horrendous plane crash just happened in the Ukraine. So, let's, offer sympathy to any of the victims, anyone who, whose relative may have been involved in that, anyone who survived, anyone, when something like this happens, you always just have nothing but sympathy for the victims. A horrendous plane crash, just awful. Videos coming out, just horrendous stuff. Now, folks may have also seen that Ron Paul, do folks remember Ron Paul? He's kind of a blast from the past, right? But Ron Paul, the big libertarian, right-wing paleoconservative, called himself a libertarian. He was doing an interview this morning and he had a stroke live on the internet during his interview. And that was interesting. It's a big deal. So Ron Paul is dealing with that. Also, rumors are now circulating that Joe Biden has selected Michelle Flournoy to be his Secretary of Defense. Do folks know about Michelle Flournoy? Well, Joe Biden is basically saying that if he gets the presidency, it's rumored, not confirmed, but rumors are circulating that the Secretary of Defense for the Biden administration will be Michelle Flournoy. And Michelle Flournoy, she comes out of Harvard. She's a neocon. She is, one of those Sovietologists who, went up through Harvard studying, doctrinaire anti-communism. She worked with the Bill Clinton administration in Eastern Europe during the 1990s. She oversaw, U.S. operations in Ukraine and in Russia and in elsewhere to work against, just dismantle socialism. She is well known to be an interventionist, and that is apparently who Joe Biden would want to replace Mark Esper with, right? Remember, first the Secretary of Defense was James Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis. That was who Trump picked. Mattis resigned. He didn't think Trump was on board with his foreign policy viewpoint. Now we've got Mark Esper as the Secretary of Defense, but apparently we now have the Hillary Clinton associate, none other than Michelle Flournoy, who would be the Secretary of Defense under Joe Biden. That's the rumor. Again, not confirmed, but it's pretty widely rumored. And that hints that faction I talk about in my new Kamala Harris book, the Hillary Clinton State Department, that particular faction, it seems to be well embedded in the Joe Biden camp. And thank you for the super chat. And if anyone else has any super chat questions, shoot them my way. I don't have a huge opening spiel to make. This is kind of a surprise live. I'm just here to chat and, enjoy the afternoon, check in with this great community. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe. Glad you all are here. But Michelle Flournoy, that's further confirming the division in the ruling class that I've been talking about between that Eastern establishment, because that's who Michelle Flournoy is. She comes out of Harvard. She comes out of Sovietology. She's a neoconservative, and she's part of that that particular wing of American power. You can go back to, Cecil Rhodes. In his will, Cecil Rhodes called for the establishment of a society that would promote the ideals of the British Empire. This is in the book that was written, a very good book, and it was written by Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley was kind of the mentor of Bill Clinton, a professor. He wrote a book called The Anglo-American Establishment. The Anglo-American Establishment, referring to a section of U.S. society that eventually gave birth to the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rhodes Scholar Program. It's a certain axis in the United States. People call it the Eastern Establishment, the Northeastern Establishment, and that's where the Council on Foreign Relations comes out of. But it really goes back to Cecil Rhodes, right? Cecil Rhodes was a big advocate of British imperialism. He was the guy that Rhodesia was named after. Folks, remember that before Zimbabwe won its independence, what was it called? It was called Rhodesia, right? After Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes was a colonizer of Africa. Why is the ruling class scared that Trump might not give up power? A Jewish bond of RSDLP. All right. Trump power. Jewish bond RSDLP. Okay. Great. We already got a couple super chats, but yeah, there is a section of U.S. society, the Eastern Establishment. There's a book called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby that's very, very good, that talks about the divisions between the military-industrial complex and the CIA and the intelligence apparatus. There are divisions in the ruling class, Carroll Quigley wrote about it. Carl Oglesby wrote about it. This is well documented. There are different circles of power, different networks that are fighting, and that Donald Trump represents one section of the ruling class, kind of revolting against the richest of the rich. Ferdinand Lundberg wrote a very good book called Rockefeller Syndrome. He also wrote another book called The Rich and the Ultra-Rich. There are divisions in the ruling class. Let's be real about this. There are factions, and that the more managerial, long-term strategic wing that's associated with big oil and Silicon Valley wants to take the White House back from the Pentagon, weapons manufacturing, short-term, right-wing faction. And the combat and the struggle within Mongolia, the struggle within the ruling class right now is intense. The ruling class is clearly not united at this moment. So, folks, I've got 3 super chats to answer. So before I do that, why don't we just do our little roll call? Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is here? Who's with us? Who's with us this afternoon? Anthony in Brooklyn. Good job, Caleb, says Boris M. Belize. Joey from Belize is with us. Tim Stacy of Kentucky. Jake from Dallas. Mom's Basement, New Jersey. Anthony Penza of Cleveland is with us. Jack Dundee of the United Kingdom is with us. Orlando, Florida. San Jose. Hungary. Vallejo, California. Arthur Porter out in Arizona. Good longtime friend. Austin, Texas. Switzerland. Julian from Southeast United Kingdom. Amherst, Massachusetts. Rusty in Culver City, California. Liverpool, United Kingdom. Bronx, New York. Russia. Mannheim, Germany. Ben in Toronto. Mohsen from Iran. Hamilton, Ontario. Cleveland. Pirate Alex, Florida. Mark from Aberdeen, Scotland. Chicago, Illinois. Alice in Virginia. Jim Kirk from Iowa. Denver, Colorado. Saturday morning in China. Melbourne, Australia. Kenny from Malaysia is with us. Oakland, California. Yi Chan in Georgia. Lagos, Nigeria. Joanne from Amsterdam. PA, Pennsylvania, USA. Not in China is with us. Very, very good. Anybody else? I'll call you out as I see you. I will call you out as I see you. Alabama. Dallas, Texas. Ralph, New Zealand. Newark, New Jersey. Who's with us this afternoon? Who is with us? I'd love to call you out as I see you. And we will just start hammering out these Syrian white helmets, good or bad. White helmets. Okay, Jerusalem, Israel, Lafayette, Louisiana, Utah. Who else is with us? Who else is with us this afternoon? Anybody else? Anybody else with us this afternoon? Rocky from Reno, Nevada. A cold and rainy Sweden, rising red tide, is with us. Very, very good. I love it when people are on here. We have great conversations. Not sure how long we will go this afternoon, but I just thought I would hop on and we would just have a quick chat. So why not, right? Brandon from San Diego is with us, right? Very, very good. Someone who calls himself Rod Dog is with us. Who else? Anyone else? I will call you out as I see you. As long as our roll call keeps going, I will keep calling you out. Samuel, someone called Samuel, is here. Salt Lakers, Slam Diego Padres. Caleb, had you ever played D&D? Asked Jacross23. Never did. Never played Dungeons and Dragons. Socialism for All is here. Very, very good. Very, very good. Newark, New Jersey. Enrique. Texas, split seconds. Glad you are here. Glad you are here. Zurich, Switzerland. 22-year-old boomer. Interesting. How can one be a 22-year-old boomer, right? When the baby boom was post-World War II. Chicago, last bastion red. He is with us. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. All right, folks. Hi, Caleb, says Howard Chu. Well, hi back to you, Howard. Good to talk to you. Virginia. Alka-Seltzers is from Virginia. But you know, we got a couple super chats here to get to, but I'll keep calling you out. Someone said Biden's hiding. All righty. Okay, folks, I think we're done with our roll call. Oh, is a socialist state a contradiction? Why do libertarian types say otherwise? Okay. Socialist state a contradiction. All righty. All right, folks, let's start talking about first question. I believe it was from Tim Stacy. He asked, why are people worried about Donald Trump not leaving office? Well, because at this point, Donald Trump has not ruled out has not, guaranteed a peaceful transition. He was asked to, and he would not do it. Now, Mitch McConnell of the Republican Party has confirmed that. Is Biden referred to as the... Okay. Biden, Delaware. All right. All righty. So, there is a big division in the ruling class right now, as you're very, very aware. Donald Trump has done a lot of things that have made a lot of people in the ruling class uncomfortable. He's done a lot of things that have made other people in the ruling class very, very happy, right? Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education of Donald Trump, loves him and everything he's doing, right? And her brother is Eric Prince of Blackwater, right? No division there. Furthermore, who else really likes Donald Trump? Who really thinks Donald Trump is great? The owner of Home Depot, Bernie Marcus. He thinks Donald Trump is amazing, right? Who else really likes Donald Trump? Sheldon Adelson, who's a real estate owner in Nevada. There are factions that like Trump, but who doesn't like Trump? Jeff Bezos can't stand Donald Trump. Who else can't stand Donald Trump? The Rockefellers, they do not like Donald Trump. Who else doesn't like Donald Trump? Who else? Bill Gates does not like Donald Trump. There is a division in the ruling class. Silicon Valley, the big oil Eastern establishment, they can't stand Donald Trump. They think he's working against U.S. foreign policy. Meanwhile, Trump is in with some key constituencies. This is Bonapartism. There's a crisis globally and a crisis domestically. There's an economic crisis globally and an economic crisis internationally. There is the rise of geopolitical rivals like Russia and China. There is mass unemployment in the United States. There is a pandemic, and the managerial wing of the ruling class feels like Donald Trump has mismanaged things and that there is more chaos than they are comfortable with. They want to stabilize U.S. society, and they see Donald Trump as unleashing chaos. That's what they want. That's what they want. Meanwhile, the faction that's in with Trump, they want to make lots of profits. Owners of Hobby Lobby, for example, right? Fracking companies love Donald Trump. So there is a big division, and the wing of the ruling class that thinks long-term, that sets up foreign policy think tanks, that is strategizing how the United States can stay on top in the long term. That wing of the ruling class is furious with Donald Trump, right? That wing of the ruling class, for example, worked really hard to set up the Iran nuclear deal. They worked really, really hard. Their strategy for Iran, right, is to, that wing of the ruling class, the Obama, Biden, Kamala Harris wing of the ruling class, what they wanted for Iran was they wanted Iran to give up its peaceful nuclear energy program, and they wanted Iran and the United States to get closer. They wanted to then somehow, they wanted to covertly kind of, start to make friends among the moderate wing of the Iranians, the reformist movement, the reformist movement, and they wanted to do to Iran what was done to Libya, right? Where they make nice at first, they open up trade, they let a bunch of American intelligence get in there and make buddies and get all nicey-nicey with wings of the Iranian government and compromise them, and then all of a sudden there's protests in the streets and the country is destabilized and an anti-imperialist government is brought down. That was their strategy for Iran. That was their strategy for Cuba, right? And it worked out pretty well in Libya, what they did. Worked out pretty well in Syria. Well, not exactly. The Syrian government is still in power, but that's what they were able to do, right? It's this strategy of what Brzezinski called strategic de-escalation. That is what the Eastern establishment wanted to do to Iran. Meanwhile, Donald Trump doesn't really care about overthrowing the Iranian government in the long term. Donald Trump wants to make lots of money for weapons manufacturers. He wants to make lots of political gains for his buddy Netanyahu in Israel. And so rather than have, an expansion of U.S. influence into Iran, infiltrating the Iranian state, strengthening the reformist movement, courting people in Iranian politics and trying to topple Iran the way Brzezinski toppled the Soviet Union. Instead, Donald Trump just wants to have an arms race. He wants to have an arms race. He wants to escalate the arms race, sell lots of missiles and weapons to the Saudis and to all these regimes over there, play up the idea there's an Iranian threat. He wants Iran to get stronger, because the stronger Iran is, the more Israel's going to be afraid of Iran, the more Netanyahu is in there, the more weapons you can sell. Trump is more interested not in a color revolution in Iran, but in an escalation with Iran. Well, so what did Donald Trump do? He ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. John Kerry spent years working to establish that Iran nuclear deal so that could feed into their long-term strategy of destabilizing Iran. Well, ripped it up, right? Donald Trump ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. What else? What else did Donald Trump do? Donald Trump has re-escalated with Cuba, right? Said, solidarity is hope. Okay, that's great. With Cuba, now we still have diplomatic relations with Cuba. He hasn't fully cut off relations, but Donald Trump has thrown U.S.-Cuba relations onto the fire once again, right? There is a difference in strategies. Meanwhile, at home, Donald Trump, he has this group of fanatical supporters among his faction of the right wing. Donald Trump knew that the virus was spread by air. Right? We have it on the Bob Woodward tape. He knew that people should be wearing masks, but you'll remember Donald Trump wouldn't wear a mask. For the longest time, Donald Trump didn't wear a mask. His supporters were having those open-up protests because they were desperate to keep their profits rolling in. Meanwhile, Bezos and Bill Gates and others, they want to keep locked down as long as they possibly can to get rid of their competitors. There is a difference in the ruling class. There are differences in the ruling class over how to handle this pandemic. There are differences in the ruling class over how to handle things internationally. I think that one section of the ruling class is talking about maybe, having a universal basic income, something to just stabilize U.S. society. Meanwhile, the Trump faction is saying libertarian, free market, capitalism is the answer. There are big divisions, the managerial bourgeoisie versus the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie. And if Donald Trump, the fear that Donald Trump won't leave office is a fear that the wing of the ruling class he represents is going to hold on to power so desperately that it could result in fracturing the U.S. state. That's the fear, right? That's the fear. And the biggest fear of the managerial bourgeoisie is real instability. They don't want the whole turnip cart to be toppled. Right? Now, they might want to remove Donald Trump, but they don't want a huge turnaround, right? They don't want things to really get shaken up here in the United States. And when you have a president who won't step down after elections, but folks, I wouldn't rule out a solid win for Donald Trump. I think, my family in Ohio says Donald Trump's got this in the bag. They see Trump signs everywhere. They don't see Joe Biden signs, right? The states that matter in the Electoral College, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, There's a very good chance Trump has got this in the bag. And if it's a solid win for Trump, there you go. But at the same time, there's what's going on with Florida right now, right? And it's possible that Trump could lose. We don't really know what's going to happen, but people are at this point far more worried about what happens the next day than actually who wins. Because if it's a contested election, it could get really, really, really ugly really, really quick, and we all know that. So that's why sections of the ruling class are worried about this. That's why you've got the Transition Integrity Project running scenarios about how they will respond if there is a contested election result. We're all very, very nervous about it. We're all very, very nervous about it. Alrighty, that answers that first super chat question. The next one, the Jewish Bund of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, right? So let's back up. Let's explain that whole controversy. Someone asked about it, I'll answer. Okay, so we all know that in Russia, there were a number of different revolutionary movements that wanted to overthrow the Tsar, right? Russia maintained the feudalist czarist system, where they had a Tsar who was like the Pope and also the king, right? He was the king, head of the state, but he was also the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was like Pope King of Russia, the Tsar, and it was feudalism. You had local aristocracy who were then subservient to the king, but in Russia's urban areas, you had capitalism. You had factories, you had capitalists and bosses. So Russia, countryside was feudal mostly, cities were capitalist, but you still maintained what the Bolsheviks called the czarist autocracy, which was, the feudal political system, right? So in Russia, there were many different groups that wanted to topple it. So the first group that emerged was they were just straight up capitalist liberals that wanted an elected government, Crony cap. All right. They were called the Constitutional Democrats. Writing it down. The Constitutional Democrats, or the Cadets for short, right? That was the first grouping. They just wanted to bring down the Tsar, have an elected government. Like the United States, like Britain. That was the first faction, the Cadets, the Constitutional Democrats. Well, but there were some revolutionaries in Europe that wanted to go beyond capitalism, right? So the first mass movement that emerged in Russia to overturn not just the czarist system, but also capitalism, Anita Hill, right? Anita Hill. All right. The first movement that was anti-capitalist in Russia was called the Narodniks. And it means peopleists, and sometimes people translate it as populists, but that's not exactly right. Populism has a different, meaning in the English language, but the Narodniks, or the Friends of the People, they were called. And it was a movement mainly of very, very rich people in Russia, students, intellectuals, who wanted to organize the peasantry. They thought the peasants of Russia were oppressed, and they wanted the peasants of Russia to rise up and redistribute the land. And so they were very rich, but they would dress up in costumes like they were peasants, live with the peasants, and they would go and try to agitate the peasants. It was a problem because many peasants were illiterate, but they couldn't hand out leaflets because they couldn't read it. But they were a mass movement in Russia, the Narodniks, that wanted to agitate the peasantry. That was the first movement. And it largely did not work. The peasantry was not interested in revolting. I mean, there'd be occasional uprisings here and there. It was a movement that existed, but, the Narodniks, the Friends of the People, never really caught on. Probably the most famous Narodnik was Peter Kropotkin, who was considered the father of Russian anarchism. And the Narodniks were considered this, peasant revolutionaries. They wanted to build peasant communes. The peasants would rise up, seize their land, share it all in common. The Narodniks were considered to be an anarchist current. Eventually, they called their organization the Social Revolutionary Party. That was the Friends of the People, the Narodniks. That was the first current. Well, after they didn't have success, the next movement to emerge among Russians who wanted to overthrow the Tsar and also wanted to get rid of capitalism was called the terrorist movement. That was actually what they were called. That wasn't like a nickname. They're called the terrorist movement. And they believed by engaging in acts of violence and terror, they could overthrow the Tsar, right? Tsar Alexander III, I believe, was killed by a terrorist. And Lenin's older brother was a terrorist, and they believed by engaging in acts of violence, these acts of violence they would do would inspire everyone to revolt. They were going to engage in terrorism, right? That was the second movement. And that didn't work. Actually, it had the opposite effect. The terrorists, by engaging in these bombings and assassinations, made people very afraid of communists, made people think communists were violent extremists, so they were not interested in that. So Marxism, China-Japan relations, all right. China-Japan relations. Marxism was the third revolutionary anti-capitalist movement in Russia. Marxism. And Marxism said that it was the factory workers, the working class, that would make the revolution, and that they tried to organize labor unions. And the father of Russian Marxism was Plekhanov, Yuri or Georgy Plekhanov, right? Plekhanov, the father of Russian Marxism. They built organizations. Their goal was to organize the worker, the working class, the industrial worker. And the Marxists in Russia, they built the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And the question was about the Jewish Bund of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, right? So there's this big party in Russia that's organizing labor unions, right? They would organize strikes among metal workers, strikes among miners. They were organizing workers. They were not organizing the peasantry. They had an alliance. They supported the peasantry, but their main focus was the workers. They were not engaging in terrorism, but instead they were trying to organize the workers, right? And their goal was to eventually set up, a workers' party, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Well, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, all of them were members of this party, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. It was the Marxist party in Russia. Bukharin, Zinoviev, all the big Bolsheviks were all members of this group. So Jews in Russia have a whole history of being discriminated against, right? Jews could only live in certain villages. They weren't allowed to live in other villages. When the economy would get bad, they'd have what were called pogroms, where they would go and lynch Jewish people. It was like a lot of like what was done to black people in the U.S. South. A mob of people would go to a Jewish village and just start killing people in mass. There was kind of a fascist movement in Russia called the Black Hundreds Party that would go around and engage in this kind of anti-Jewish violence. Jews were very, very much discriminated against. And often when Jews had land in the countryside, when they were peasants, they would be driven out. So a lot of Jews moved to urban areas. So because of that, you had a lot of Jews who were in the Marxist movement. And many Jews in Russia argued that because Jews were so badly discriminated against in Russia at that time, they should have their own party, right? They shouldn't be part of the overall the regular Marxist party. They should have their own organization. So the Jews who wanted to have a separate Marxist group for Jews were called the Bund, and they were called Bundists. They believed in Marxism, but they believed that Jews needed to have their own separate party. And furthermore, they also argued that their goal was not to overthrow capitalism in all of Russia, but was to establish like a Jewish region, a Jewish socialist region that would kind of break away from the rest of Russia, right? It was like they were going to create like a little Israel in Russia, right? That would be like a Jewish socialist area in Russia, right? And that was the Bundist movement, right? There was labor Zionism, which was Jewish socialists who wanted to take the Jews of Russia to move to Israel and establish like socialism in Israel. But then there was the Bundist movement, which was Russian Jews who believed in Marxism, but believed that they should organize as Jews, not with the rest of Russian society, and that they should fight for a separate Jewish autonomous region. And that was the Bundist movement, okay? And Lenin did not agree with the Bundist movement. Didn't agree with it. And he argued against it. And he said that we need a multinational party, that the Bolshevik party should be a party of Russians, of Ukrainians, of Georgians, of Moldovans, and that they would grant autonomy to all these different nationalities within the future socialist state, but they would not have separate parties for different nationalities and races. That was Lenin's position, and Lenin himself was Jewish, but he did not agree with organizing a Jewish Marxist movement for Jews only. He instead said that they needed to build an all-Russian, or all the peoples of the Russian Empire needed to have one party. And we know that party eventually broke away from the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. It was the party of new type that Lenin established, the Bolshevik Party, which was different. The regular Russian Marxist Party, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, was very loose. It was very loosely affiliated. Anybody could join as long as they agreed to certain principles. It was very loose. Well, Lenin said we needed a highly disciplined organization, a group of people who give, quote, the whole of their lives to the revolution, of all different nationalities, Jewish, Moldovan, Russian, Ukrainian, whatever, all in one party. And that party will be, they'll give the whole of their lives to it, and that will be the party of a new type. Bolshevik means majority, because in exile, Lenin called a meeting in 1903 in exile in London. He was living in London. He'd been kicked out of Russia for being a revolutionary. So he and a bunch of Russians living in exile, they gathered in a room in London, and they formed the party of new type. And the majority of the people in the room agreed to join it, so they were the majority. The minority in the room didn't want to join it, so they became the Mensheviks. So the old RSDLP, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, became known as the Mensheviks, whereas the Bolsheviks, the majority faction that went with Lenin, were called the Bolsheviks, the majority. They were both called the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, and people referred to them as the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolshevik and the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Menshevik. But Bundism became a completely separate movement. What's interesting, though, is that after the Russian Revolution, there was so much chaos in Russia after the Russian Revolution, and the anti-Bolshevik people, the White Army they were called, the forces that didn't like the Bolsheviks, were so anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic that the Bundists ended up aligning with the Bolsheviks during the Russian Civil War. And there was actually not just the Bundists, but also the labor Zionists. There was even a labor Zionist division of the Red Army. So after the Russian Revolution, the Bundists and the Bolsheviks and even the labor Zionists all joined arm in arm. Basically, all the Jews of Russia were with the Bolsheviks because the White Army was so anti-Semitic. And during the Russian Civil War, there was just mass killing of Jews, all through Russia. The White Army would come to an area and just kill every Jew. They thought Bolshevism was a Jewish conspiracy, etc. So because of that, almost all Jews in Russia ended up joining with the Bolsheviks. And then Stalin later established the Jewish Autonomous Region. So actually, in a weird way, what the Bundists wanted was actually created by Stalin. Stalin created, I believe it was like 1932, around that time, he created an area of Russia that was called the Jewish Autonomous Region, JAR. And actually the biggest menorah in the world is still located there. And there's still a lot of Jewish people who live in the Jewish Autonomous Region of Russia. He argued that for Jews as a national minority in Russia to be represented in the government, they needed to have their own territory. So the Soviet Union created the Jewish Autonomous Region. And they, until 1942, the Soviet Union had two houses. They had the Supreme Soviet, which was like the elected, the House of Representatives, basically. And then they had this other thing called the House of Nationalities, where every nationality had one vote, right? Russians had one vote, Ukrainians had one vote. Well, Jews had one vote in the House of Nationalities in the Soviet Constitution. There was a Supreme Soviet, was based on population via workplace. And then there was the House of Nationalities. Well, Stalin eventually abolished the House of Nationalities. He said, we don't want to be divided. At the time they were fighting World War II, and the Nazis were very much trying to play different minorities against each other. The Nazis recruited a lot of Chechens, for example. The Nazis recruited a lot of Ukrainians. And so, the Nazis were trying to divide the peoples of the Soviet Union on the basis of their nationality. So Stalin argued that we need to get rid of national, the House of Nationalities. So Stalin abolished the House of Nationalities. So that was the end of that. The Jewish Autonomous Region, I think it stopped being an official separate region. But even today, long after the fall of the Soviet Union, there's still, a large number of Jewish people that live in that area. It's very fascinating. So the person who asked about the RSDLP and the Jewish Bund, I hope that answers your question. It's a long answer, but it's all very, very important, right? This is all very, very important history to understand. Okay. I don't know much about the current government of Mongolia. I know it's friendly to Russia, it's friendly to China, and there's a lot, going on in the Far East right now, the Vladivostok Economic Forum and the Far East of Russia. There's a huge farming boom going on there. And China and Russia are really determined to bring Eurasia into the 21st century, but I can't really comment very much on the current government of Mongolia. All right, Syrian white helmets, not a big fan, not a big fan. That is a group of people, a lot of what they say has been questioned. They engage in a lot of propaganda intended to overthrow the Syrian government. Many people have pointed out that there are some shady ties to al-Nusra and terrorist groups. The Syrian white helmets, they're called. Okay, Grover, all right. The Syrian white helmets are, I'm not a big fan. I think that in some ways they function as a propaganda group that is trying to set the stage for the United States government to overthrow the Syrian government. That's what they want. They are a regime change lobby group. Many people have looked at their ties to terrorist groups like al-Nusra. They have been caught, being very deceptive in a lot of the information that they put out. Not a big fan of the white helmets. Not a big fan. Not a big fan. All right. All right. Is socialist state a contradiction? No, because, socialism and communism are not the same thing, right? Socialism is a society where the banks, factories, and major industries and the centers of economic power are controlled by the state, right? Capitalism is a system of profits in command. It is a system of production organized for profit. Under capitalism, food isn't produced so people can eat it. It's produced so agribusiness and big box stores can make money selling it. Under capitalism, we don't have housing so people can live in it. We have housing so bankers and landlords can make money from it. Capitalism is a system where everything is done for profit. Production and the whole economy functions for profit. Socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power are controlled by society. It's when you have a government of action that takes control of the economy and forces it to work in the interests of public good. Right? That's the difference between capitalism and socialism. Socialism is a transition, right? And this is very, very important. The understanding has always been that socialism is a transition to the ultimate goal of communism. And communism is a stateless, classless world. Communism is a world with so much material abundance that there is no need for any coercion. Communism is the ultimate goal of the class struggle, thousands of years into the future. So a socialist state is not a contradiction because the state, the idea is that society as a whole, there's a working class revolution, the working class majority rises up and takes control of the state, uses the state to rationally plan the economy so you don't have the chaos of production anymore, the anarchy of production, the chaos of profits, the market spawned chaos, and that eventually that leads us closer and closer to that final goal of communism, right? And communism, yes, is the idea that there won't be any need for any coercion, right? Is that based on such abundance existing in society, the state kind of withers away. So socialist state, yes. Communist state, no. So that's the issue there. And we're talking strictly about Marxism, right? And that socialism exists in the world today. Socialism is not simply state ownership. Socialism is when you have a state controlling the means of production, planning the economy on behalf of the population, right? Under capitalism, corporations and capitalists control the government. Under socialism, the government controls the corporations and controls the economy for the people. That's the difference. Frederick Engels said that socialism is production upon a predetermined plan. Probably the most important book in understanding what socialism actually is Frederick Engels' book, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. Okay. All right. Joe Biden in Delaware. Folks, Delaware, right, is a very small U.S. state, not a big state. And it is a state that is deeply impoverished. And it's a tax haven. I mean, it is a tax haven. You go to Delaware, like all kinds of corporations, like thousands of corporations are based out of one single building because Delaware gives them tax loopholes to use that building. And the people of Delaware are deeply, deeply poor. It's not a very big state. You can drive through it in an hour or two, I think less than that, right? Very small state, a lot of African-American folks living in Wilmington, very, very, very poor, very, very poor state. Joe Biden has been the king of Delaware politics for a long time. And I got to tell you, visiting Delaware, go to Delaware sometime, not a strong argument in Biden's favor. He's into trains. They have trains there. The Amtrak does go there. And downtown Wilmington, there's like 3 blocks in downtown Wilmington that are pretty nice. But it's a very impoverished state. A lot of very, very poor people there. One interesting thing about Delaware is despite the fact that it was not in the South, Delaware always did have a big African American population. But in many ways, Delaware was considered to be almost similar to the Jim Crow South. In a way. I mean, they had, for example, up into the 1950s in Delaware, they had the whipping post. You broke the law, you could get sentenced to a public whipping. And it didn't happen to white people. It never happened to white people. It was like an unwritten rule that basically when black people break the law, they can get public floggings, and it doesn't happen to white people. It wasn't actually in the law that whites were excluded from it, but everybody knew that the whipping post in Wilmington, Delaware, was only for black people, and it was like a holdover from slavery. Very disgusting. And that there's a whole history there. I mean, you can read about some of the hate crimes that go on, and that there are certain white families in Delaware that seem to have all the power, even though there are a lot of African Americans there. And there's a lot of poverty in that state. I mean, Delaware, and it's a tax haven. I mean, the state is a big tax haven. Delaware is not a strong argument in Biden's favor. Let me put it that way. That's all I can say about that. Okay. Someone asked me about crony capitalism. Engels, Anarchy, and Social Production. Okay. Anarchy and Social Production. All right, the next question I got asked was about crony capitalism. This is a very common talking point. You will hear from defenders of capitalism, people who are libertarian or defenders of capitalism. When you point out something bad in the capitalist system, they'll say, that's not capitalism. They'll say, that is crony capitalism. Right? And that quote-unquote real capitalism, they would argue, is the glorious free market where everyone just works hard and gets ahead and all of that. Well, my response to that is simple. All capitalism is crony capitalism. All capitalism is crony capitalism. Never has there ever in all of human history been a capitalist society in which those who have lots and lots of wealth did not write the laws in a way to make sure that they preserved their wealth. Never has there been a capitalism where a small group of wealthy people did not have disproportionate influence over how the laws were written, over how the government operated. Imagine, right? Capital punishment. Imagine, Zach, I'm glad CPI, we'll talk about that. All right, imagine that, that you had millions and millions of dollars, millions more than most people. And with that money, you had the ability to influence government officials. Would you not influence them to write the laws in a way to make sure that you kept your millions and millions of dollars and didn't have some competitor put you out of business, right? Capitalism leads to wealth disparity. In capitalist societies, wealth equals power. Therefore, those with more wealth will use that wealth to influence laws and government and institutions. All capitalism is crony capitalism. There has never been a society that did not engage in crony capitalism. Ayn Rand wrote a book called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, arguing that real capitalism was unknown. Well, that's very, very true, because the market utopia that they have, it's very impractical, because the market results in winners and losers, right? And wealth concentrates in the hands of a few, wealth equals power, and they then rig the government to make sure that it helps them stay in power. So all capitalism is crony capitalism, period. And that's what libertarians do not understand. And this idea that we can have this magical fantasy capitalism where the government never rigs things for private owners, well, that's especially not going to happen when some people have more wealth than others and more influence. All right, who is Anita Hill? Anita Hill was a woman who worked with what was his name? Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Before he became a Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas, he had a secretary who worked with him, and he reportedly sexually harassed her, Anita Hill. He made remarks to her about the size of his genitals. There was apparently a popular pornographic film at the time that featured a porn star with a very, never mind, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but he would make inappropriate sexual jokes to her, and he would talk about his own body parts to her, and he would talk about porno movies to her, to Anita Hill. And she obviously did not appreciate that. It was sexual harassment. So when Clarence Thomas, who was a Republican, an African-American Republican, was appointed by Ronald Reagan to be on the Supreme Court, she came forward and she said, she said that, hey, this guy has been my boss and he's a creep. And he, he talked to me about, porno, and he talked to me about, Coke cans, and you can Google the specifics. I don't want to repeat every little detail of it here. But, Anita Hill basically said, look, Clarence Thomas has been highly inappropriate with me. I'm sorry, I missed a super chat. It went by. What did it say? I want to give everyone a chance. What did the super chat that went by? What was the last super chat? Someone repeat it, please. Someone repeat it. What was it? What was the super chat? Socialism in America? Was that what the super chat was? What was the super chat? Someone repeat it, please. Someone repeat it. What would socialism in America look like? Okay, all right. What would socialism in America look like? And then someone said crony socialism. Okay. Okay, alrighty. So Anita Hill came forward and said, look, he's sexually harassing me, and it was a big deal. Well, they ended up confirming Clarence Thomas as a Supreme Court justice anyway. But Anita Hill testified, and Joe Biden, I think the reason the person's probably bringing them up is because of Joe Biden. Joe Biden was particularly nasty to Anita Hill. He didn't like her accusation of sexual harassment. He was pretty mean to her, even though he was a Democrat, but he just didn't like her doing that for some reason. So that's probably why they brought it up. And Anita Hill, and it's kind of interesting because this is decades and decades. This is before I was born, right? But this is Me Too is far more recent, but this is before I was born, this stuff was happening. And it was a big incident where this woman said, look, Clarence Thomas is a little bit of a creeper. And it was the first time there was kind of a national conversation about sexual harassment in the workplace. Alrighty, China-Japan relations. Well, at this point, with the United States kind of backing off on the global stage, I think there's hope for China and Japan to get along better. When Obama was pushing his Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, that was to create an ultimatum in Asia. Basically, you're with China or you're with the United States, the TPP. And Trump ripped it up. So now there's much more hope for Japan-China relations. Now, if a Democrat comes back in, he will try to polarize Japan against China. But at this point, what kind of tax rate would there be in the U.S.? What kind of taxes? Okay, all right, let's talk about taxes. All righty. So, yeah, the TPP was a hope to kind of create a zone where it was like you're with China or you're with the United States, but then, Trump got rid of the TPP. So there you go. All right, Grover Furr. I've met Grover Furr many times. I've had dinner with him, lunch with him. He's a very friendly man. The book that he wrote that I got the most out of was called Blood Lies, and it was a refutation of Dr. Timothy Snyder's book, Bloodlands. Dr. Timothy Snyder is the head of Russian studies at Yale, and Dr. Timothy Snyder, wrote this book called Bloodlands, trying to say that the Soviet Union was worse than the Nazis in World War II. That's the point of his book. And Grover Furr wrote this book, Blood Lies, a very thick book documenting that Timothy Snyder was being dishonest in his book, completely dishonest, in his attempt to try and make the case that the Nazis weren't as bad as those evil communists. That's the point of his book, Blood Lies. Grover Furr shows that he blatantly misrepresents a lot of things in the Soviet archives, right? And that and Timothy Snyder is awful, right? Is on totalitarianism. He's a talking head in the latest Michael Moore movie. And he's awful. And he is an anti-communist. He is an anti-populist. He is a fanatical regime change enthusiast. He hates Russia with a passion, and he's dedicated himself to, demonizing Russia. That's what you do if you're head of the Yale Russian Studies Department. You're going to work to try and demonize Russia. And, Timothy Snyder, his book, Blood Lies, has been ripped to shreds by Grover Furr. I'm glad he did that. Grover Furr, his work, I don't fully understand everything he says, and some of the conclusions he comes to, I'm not ready to endorse. But when he shows that Trotsky did have mail receipts and Trotsky had been in contact with Zinoviev and Bukharin, that's, and that Trotsky lied about that, that's worth noting. But probably the best book by Grover Furr I would recommend, check out Blood Lies, because that book shows that Timothy Snyder, who is all over U.S. media, he's like one of the main anti-Russian scholars, a lot of what he says is malarkey. It's malarkey. And Timothy Snyder is not a good guy, and I'm not a big fan of Timothy Snyder, and that his book, Bloodlands, Grover Furr rips it to shreds in his book, Blood Lies. Alrighty. Anarchy and Social Production. That's in the book. That's actually the opening line of Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels. As he said, modern socialism is a reaction to the division of society into classes, as well as anarchy in social production. And that refers to the fact that under capitalism, another way it's been put is that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Capital only does it if it's profitable, right? Karl Marx talks about the general law of capitalist accumulation. Capitalists don't build buildings because they feel like it. Capitalists don't make airplanes because they feel like it. Capitalists don't, publish books because they feel like it. Everything a capitalist does is to accumulate more capital so they can then invest it and accumulate more capital. The general law of capitalist accumulation. And it leads to situations that are completely chaotic. And that, that where tasks that need to be done don't get done, right? And that you get a situation where, for example, capitalism leads to gluts, right? G-L-U-T, important term in economics, glut, G-L-U-T, glut, which means you have so much of a commodity that the price drops significantly because, people don't need it. Frequently, in the farming sector, for example, the government buys milk from farmers and dumps it out. That happens all the time. The government buys milk from American farmers and dumps it out. Why? To keep the price of milk up, right? Because if the government did not buy that milk from those farmers and then dump it out, and those farmers just sold that milk, the price of milk would shoot way down, and all the farmers would go out of business, right? That's not natural, right? In a situation where people are food insecure and don't have the food that they need, why in the world would we, have the government buying lots of milk and cheese from farmers and burying it or dumping it out? Because of the anarchy in social production. We don't have production for use, we have production for profit. As Ramiro said, profits in command. I don't know about Navid Akfari, I don't know about it. Can't talk about that. But that is the problem with capitalism, is you have production for profit, not production for need or production for social necessity. And I think that's that Engels is referring to when he opens the book. It's like the first line of the book is that modern socialism has arisen as a reaction to the division of society into classes and the anarchy in social production. And the goal of socialism is for the working class to take control of the state and abolish the anarchy in social production. They abolish the anarchy of social production, and they rationally plan out the economy. Production upon a predetermined plan. That's the idea. All right. What do I think about capital punishment? Well, honestly, I'm against it. Right? I don't think that, that it's a good thing. It's not a good thing. And there's a reason that after the Paris Commune took power, one of the first things they did was burn down the guillotine because execution is a pretty barbaric thing. The death penalty is a pretty barbaric institution. Now, I would like to see a society in which there is no death penalty. and most Western countries have gotten to the point that there is no death penalty. Russia basically doesn't have the death penalty anymore. France, Germany, Britain, they don't have the death penalty anymore. We maintain the death penalty in the United States. Now, most of the developing world has the death penalty. And I'm not saying that's right necessarily, but it's a different situation. Look, in Iran, in China, if you are caught, in Iran, if you're caught bringing drugs into Iran, they kill you, period. Right? They hang you. You're a drug dealer, they hang you. Right? China, you're caught bringing drugs into China, they hang you. Right? In Cuba, you're caught trying to destabilize the Cuban government, they kill you. Right? There was a Cuban general who had been working to try and bring drugs into the country, I believe in the 1990s, and Fidel sent him to the firing squad. Right? Now, I don't believe in the death penalty, but why do countries like Cuba, countries like Iran, countries like China use the death penalty? Well, they use it because the people that they're up against, the people trying to overthrow them, also use it. It's like an arms race, right? In China, the drug cartels that were doing heroin, they kill people all the time. They're vicious, right? You get on their side, they kill you, right? In Iran, the Jindullah terrorists, Al-Qaeda, the heroin gangs out of Afghanistan, you get on their bad side, they kill you. So in order to have equal firepower, basically, right, the Iranian state, the Cuban state, the Chinese state feel like they need to have the ability to, these guys can threaten people with death. We need to be able to threaten people with death. And one thing I will say about the death penalty is, as much as I'm opposed to it, in the United States, the death penalty makes very, very little sense. In Iran, you're caught with heroin, they kill you. So most people are going to go, I'm not going to be importing heroin because they'll kill me, right? For example, in China, right? It's, you're caught working with some, Tibetan group that's blowing stuff up and killing people. You're caught doing that, we kill you. So most people say, I'm not going to work with this Tibetan separatist group that's killing people because they'll kill me. It's a deterrent. I mean, it works. It's pretty barbaric. It's brutal use of brute force, right? Threat of violence. But then again, you have to remember they're up against people that do the exact same thing. So it's kind of like an arms race where it's like, if they're going to be vicious, we have to be vicious in response. It's not, I'll get to that, patron stream. It's not a good thing, but there's a reason that they do it. I'm good. Yeah. There's a reason that they do it. It makes sense, right? It's like, hey, in Singapore, right? Singapore is not a socialist country, but in Singapore, you bring drugs into Singapore, we kill you. So people are like, oh, we don't want to bring drugs in, we don't want to be killed. It makes sense. The United States, the way we do the death penalty, does not make any sense whatsoever. In the United States, you only get the death penalty if you murder somebody and it's a really insane murder, like you ate them or you chop them into pieces or torture someone to death. Major decisions, the Supreme Court. Okay, all right. Right, so that's the first thing. Right? The second thing is if you kill a police officer, you'll get the death penalty. And in most states in the United States, you won't get the death penalty. But in Ohio, in Texas, and most of the South, Breonna Taylor, and, in most of the South, you kill a police officer or you commit a very, very heinous murder, and you'll get the death penalty. The thing is that that you don't get the death penalty immediately. You get it usually 20 years. It usually takes 20 years for you to get killed to get the death penalty for what you did, number one. And number two, it's not like, hey, I'm mad at so-and-so, I go kill them. You don't get the death penalty for that, right? It's like you have to be like a twisted, demented serial killer, and then they catch you, killing people and raping and torturing them or doing some really horrendous crime, and then they put you in a jail for 20 years, and then they kill you. That's not a deterrent, right? For example, the killing of police officers generally happens in some kind of armed confrontation. There's a drug dealer, the cops are coming for him, somebody shoots. So he's not thinking during that confrontation, I better not shoot back, or armed robberies, situations where police officers are getting killed, right, are not situations where people are thinking, is this the right thing to do? I don't know. I don't want to get the death penalty, right? And they're not going to get it for 20 years, right? Second of all, people that engage in those horrendous types of murders that get the death penalty, that are not police officers, SCOTUS. They are not the type of people that will rationally think this out, right? People, Jack the Ripper kind of people, right? The Zodiac Killer, or Ted Bundy. People like that are not thinking, oh boy, I better not do this. I'm going to get the death penalty. They're nuts. They're irrational. They're out of control. They're insane. So, and on top of that, if you make the death penalty happen 20 years after they commit the crime, that's not a deterrent. So the way we institute the death penalty in the United States is not a deterrent. It's not a deterrent, right? People in the United States who either kill police officers or kill, people in very brutal, nasty ways are not deterred by the death penalty. The death penalty does not prevent them from doing what they do. So it doesn't make any sense. I'm against all the death penalty. If I had my way, no country in the world would have the death penalty. However, the countries that in the third world that have it, like the socialist countries, China, that has the death penalty, North Korea, it makes sense. Cuba makes sense. It makes sense. It's a deterrent, right? You do this, we kill you. Oh, better not do that. I don't want to get killed. The way we do the death penalty here in the United States, the way we do the death penalty here in the United States does not make sense. I'll have to look into that case you're asking about. I don't want to say it's the wrong thing. I want to look into the facts. Cultural Revolution, I don't want to talk about execution methods. What was the question that went by about a cultural revolution? Can someone repeat that? Can someone repeat that? Can someone repeat that, please? It was something about a cultural revolution. On the basis, without a cultural revolution, as the ultra-lefts will argue for. How do we change a cultural revolution? Change without it. Okay, and I don't know about that case. The thing is, I want to say the right thing. I don't want to give you inaccurate information. People are asking me about a specific case in Iran. I'll Google it, I'll look into it, but I don't want to give you inaccurate information on here. I want to tell you the right thing. I don't want to spread inaccuracies. It's my responsibility not to say inaccurate things. So you're asking me to comment on a case that I'm hearing about from your super chats now. I need to Google it. I need to learn about it, right? So I'm sorry, I'm not just going to spout off based on what someone told me in a super chat. I'm going to do the research. That's my responsibility. The way we institute the death penalty here in the United States doesn't make sense. Executing people 20 years from now for killing a police officer or really, really brutal murders doesn't make any sense. And the reason that we do it in the United States, it's not a deterrent. Actually, the states that have the death penalty tend to have more murders than states that don't. It is not actually a deterrent according to statistics. What it is, many Protestants who really strongly believe that a life for a life is right and that it makes people feel better, right? It gives people a sense of security. This feeling that this person killed somebody, but now we will kill them. It gives people with a certain mindset, a certain authoritarian mindset, it gives them a sense of security. And it serves a religious purpose. If you are somebody who believes God makes everything right, you believe we all get justice in the end, you're the kind of person that would want the death penalty to exist, because then you'll believe, okay, if someone kills my family member, but they will get death, see, the universe is right. There is karma in the universe, right? It has a spiritual and religious purpose in the United States. It's not about actually deterring crime. And it's for police officers in particular. There's a feeling that we need to kill somebody who killed one of us. It's like this desire for revenge, right? It's this idea that out of risk, we risk our lives as cops, so anyone who kills one of us, we need them to die. It's not rational. It is based on a religious desire. It's based on some high emotions and desire for revenge. That's what it's about. And that is particularly demented in my view. I think that's very unhealthy. That if we're going to have prisons and courts and punishments in society, they should serve to make society safer. They should not serve a psychological or religious purpose. That's why I'm particularly against the death penalty in the United States, because the way we apply it is irrational. Venezuela doesn't have the death penalty. There's supposed to be this brutal dictatorship, horrible regime. They don't have the death penalty. They don't. They do not have the death penalty. They got rid of it in the 1800s. It's a part of U.S. society that we've had, and certain states are not going to give it up. You'll notice that many states that have the death penalty, like Texas, like Alabama, like Mississippi, like Florida, they also have corporal punishment in public schools, right? In the Florida Panhandle, in Texas, not in urban areas, but in rural areas, you'll still have teachers beating students with paddles. And it's the same kind of idea. There needs to be harsh penalties. If people break the law, they will suffer. It serves that kind of religious purpose. Now, a lot of psychologists look into corporal punishment and they say it doesn't actually help people. You're not really helping kids by beating them with a paddle. If they, screw up, it doesn't really help them improve. It doesn't help them become better. It actually kind of damages people. But at the same time, in these states, they feel like this is what needs to happen to children. When they break the rules, we need to beat them, right? And it's a similar kind of mindset. It serves a psychological and religious purpose, not an actual purpose of deterring crime. And it's a similar thing. So that was my rant on capital punishment. Let me be clear, I am against all capital punishment. I think the death penalty should be gotten rid of. However, I think that it makes more sense as a deterrent in some societies than the way we do it here in the United States. But at the end of the day, no country should have the death penalty. China should stop executing people. Iran should stop executing people. North Korea should stop executing people. I think that all countries, I have no idea what kind of painting that is behind me. I'm not the decorator. I think that all countries should get rid of the death penalty. All right, I got a lot of super chats to get through and not a lot of time here. You're ready for CPI. Great, so am I. We're having a conference call tomorrow. Send me an email if you want to be on the conference call. We're trying to figure out about having a public Zoom conference. So send me an email, first name, last name @gmail.com. All right, what would socialism in America look like? Well, I have many times stated a 4-point plan, a 4-point vision to transition to socialism in the United States. First would be a reconstruction project, a vast state-led effort to reconstruct the country, rebuild the roads, rebuild the infrastructure, rebuild the university system, new technology, high-speed rail, just a huge revamping of the country in terms of infrastructure led by the state. We would mobilize the population with like a 5-year economic plan to just rebuild the whole country. No more water that's not purified, no crumbling power plants, no roads that are unpaved. We would just reinvent the country, step 1. Step 2, public control of natural resources, oil, gas, coal, timber, all the natural resources of the United States should be public property, and all the profits or revenue brought in by them should go into the public budget, right? Public control of our natural resources. Step number 3, a state monopoly on banking. The government should be the only entity that lends money at interest, right? The government, if you want to start a business, you go to the community and say that my business will help the community. You get your loan. When you pay your loan back, it goes into the public budget, right? The printing of money should be done by the state, right? And credit cards. When individuals, they want to get a credit card, the credit card should come from the state, right? That a state monopoly on the lending of money, public control of banking, a national bank that has a monopoly on credit. That would be the 3rd step. The 4th step would be instituting an economic bill of rights, guaranteeing all citizens the right to health care, the right to education, the right to housing, and doing those 4 steps, right? That would basically lead to a transition towards socialism. Now, at that point, there would still be a lot of capitalism in the United States, still be a lot of private industries, but at that point, the government would have enough control over the economy that we would not have the anarchy of production, that profits would not be in command. And that would basically lead the transition towards socialism in the United States. If banking, oil were run by the state, if we had a mass public mobilization led by the state to completely rebuild the country, and if we started guaranteeing every citizen certain economic rights, socialism would be pretty close, right? It would require, the only way you could really implement that would be to have a government based in popular communities and all of that. And in order to implement that, you would have to change the military. You would have to change the political system, because there would be so much opposition to that from the ruling class that basically the working class would have to take control of the state in order to enact those programs. Those are my 4 transitional demands, you can call them. That's my transitional program to socialism in the United States. Those are the 4 points. That would lay the basis for the transition. All righty. Crony socialism. I don't know what that means. I mean, socialist states are going to have populations and constituencies they serve. Is there corruption in socialist countries? Absolutely. Are there bribes? There's cronyism in socialist countries, if that's what the person is asking about. Taxes. Well, right now, the tax system in the United States is rigged in favor of the ultra-rich. Big corporations don't pay any taxes. Meanwhile, working families, and particularly the middle class, are really hit with the tax burden. I think we should tax Wall Street transactions. I think we should tax the activities of the millionaires and billionaires. I think we should take into public ownership major corporations. So, yeah, I don't like the fact that working people pay a lot of their money in taxes when they work very, very hard. And conservatives say that's socialism. No, it's not. Socialism is a system where the banks, factories, and industries serve the people. It's not taxation. All right. The next Patreon stream, I don't know when it's going to be yet. I haven't determined. It will be before the end of the month, Lily, but I haven't determined when it's going to be. As soon as I figure out when it's going to be, I will send the link out to every patron subscriber. I am committed to having one before the end of the month. We have one every month. That is the agreement if you're a patron. So there will be another patron stream soon, but we're not there yet. All righty. Supreme Court major decisions. Roe versus Wade, I think there's a very good chance the Roe v. Wade ruling could be overturned and that certain red states will outlaw abortion. I think that's very, very likely. We shall see. There are also some interesting rulings about, civil liberties that could be, coming up. What do these terrorism laws mean? There's a lot of questions about what some of these terrorism laws actually mean. Where does freedom of speech end and terrorism laws begin to apply? There's also some questions about intellectual property and social media, for example. Do social media corporations, do they have the right to ban people? Silicon Valley probably has a lot at stake in upcoming Supreme Court rulings and their ability to push political agendas and stuff. And, is Facebook violating election laws if they're rigging the algorithms for one candidate? There's a lot that'll be before the Supreme Court. Okay. Breonna Taylor. Look. The police state in the United States is out of control. I've said this many times. I did a whole thing, what's causing the police state. I think both Trump and Biden are worried and want there to be more stability and would like the police state to calm down. Now, Trump is presenting himself as the champion of the police. Biden is positioning himself as more listening to people upset about police brutality. But at the end of the day, the policing agencies of the United States on a local level, local cops are out of control. They are out of control. They tend to be more racist than other institutions. They have a bias. They target, African Americans. This is a case where, the police came into someone's home and shot somebody. The Breonna Taylor case, horrendous. And I can understand why people are outraged. And I'm quite disturbed by the fact that it seemed like right before that ruling, a number of people were removed from Twitter. My good friend Dakota Lilly, great friend of mine, pro-Venezuela activist, brilliant student. He studied at New School University. He went on the Tucker Carlson show around Venezuela. Great guy. They banned him from Twitter. His Twitter account is suspended for no reason at all. But thousands of progressive people, right before the Breonna Taylor ruling went down, had their accounts shut down. That's not right. Twitter, I think, was trying to maybe destabilize protests or something. But look, I understand why people are angry. The police state is a threat to everyone. The prison industrial complex, the fact that our police departments are trained in Israel, the way that they're not held accountable when they kill somebody. This is out of control. This is completely out of control, right? Dinesh D'Souza, this right-wing, guy that I really don't like, he shared a video of a woman who wasn't wearing a mask at a high school sporting event getting beaten up by a police officer. That's wrong. All over the country, there are instances like this. And, where the policing agencies have been loaded up with these huge military-grade weapons. They've been trained in Israel. And then they have this quotas where they're like required to arrest so many people. They're desperate to get an arrest to fill their quota. There you go. So I'm not okay with that. All right, Supreme Court of the United States. I think I answered that already. Cultural revolution, will it be necessary? Look, here's the thing. Well, when you say cultural revolution, I assume you're not referring to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I assume you're referring to the idea that we need to change the culture. And I think that you've got the chicken or the egg, right? That culture, right? Culture is determined by the economic base. When the economic base of society changes, culture can change. Our culture in the United States is very much a reflection of capitalism, right? Our media, our educational institutions, our society in general exists to serve capital. Advertising is everywhere to increase the profits of corporations. TV programs get canceled or promoted based on how much ad revenue that they can make. Social media is very much determined by profits, and that our culture is very much dictated by what is profitable, right? Culture is controlled by profits. So rather than trying to change the culture so we can change to socialism, we need to change to socialism so we can change the culture, right? That socialism will have a culture that is much more about people working together, much more a sense of community, much more a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood, and the feeling of oneness, and people working together, and being more selfless, and having individualism, and working for the good of the community. I think we have a very individualist culture right now, and I think that, yes, in a lot of ways, our culture right now is very pornographic. It's very crass. And that's because capitalists don't want to take risks. I've said many times that grossness takes the place of everything. Instead of making a scary horror movie, they make a movie that's supposed to be a scary movie, and it just grosses you out with a lot of blood and gore. Instead of making a very funny and clever movie, they have a movie that just grosses you out with a lot of sex and mucus and poop and whatever, and instead of making you laugh, they gross you out, right? Instead of making an action movie that's very exciting, they make a movie full of violence, right? And that grossness and grotesqueness has come to replace actual art because it's less risky, right? That's what's going on right now. Is there's a big effort. Our culture has become so profit-oriented that we've kind of come to embrace grossness. That beauty has been rejected because if you're going to 100 BC synthetic lab, the content you give has put me in a new political identity, and very grateful for this. Well, I'm really glad you like my content, and thank you for that. But yeah, that our modern culture has very much embraced grossness, and that's why Hollywood makes the same movie over and over and over again. Why? Guaranteed return on their investment. That's what happens. That's the situation, right? That when art is based on profits, right, you have a problem. The Sistine Chapel was not painted by Leonardo da Vinci because he wanted to make a profit. The music of Bach and Beethoven was not composed so that a profit could be made. And that in previous societies, there was an understanding that the role of the artist and the role of the cultural worker was to improve their audience, to make their audience better, to make their audience smarter, to make their audience think differently, to enhance their audience. Now, what our art does is it's the opposite. We lower everything to the lowest common denominator to make sure that there's the maximum viewership, maximum ad revenue. So instead of art making people better, art makes people stupider. That's the problem that we have. We have a pornographication of our culture. There's grossness everywhere, and this is a problem, right? That artists no longer are seen as people with a responsibility. They're seen as wage slaves. Their job is to just churn out crap that'll make profits for the media company they work for. That's a problem. That is a problem. People say that's right wing. I don't think it's right wing. I don't think it's right wing. The right wing love free markets. They love profits, right? They might have social conservatism that sometimes is at odds with it. At the end of that, they hate it. And the artist should always be pushing the envelope, not being a conservative, but forcing people to think in new ways. The artist should be asking new, bold questions. So the artist is not a conservative. The artist is a progressive. The artist is constantly trying to get people to think in a more deeply way, to question old ideas, to question predetermined assumptions. So the artist is not a conservative. People say this is an alt-right or a conservative critique. It's the opposite. It is the opposite. I am saying that the artist should be constantly challenging his audience, constantly showing them things they may not be comfortable with, right? But crassness, grossness, pornography, repeating the same sequel, the same movie over and over and over again, that is a result of the corruption of art and the corruption of culture by profits and by capitalism. And that needs to be gotten rid of. The artist has a responsibility. He's like your doctor, right? His job is to be the doctor for your mind. All right, folks. And I think that's where we're cutting it off for today. It's been fun. It's been a packed afternoon live. It's been fun. Always fun to engage with you all. I'm glad we were able to have an afternoon live here. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. I'm out, folks, and don't forget we need a government of action that will fight for working families. Bye-bye.